I want to welcome you all tonight to this forum that we're having on the Old Town Project. I'm very, very pleased to have you here tonight for two reasons. First of all, as we've all been enjoying looking around the room, today is the first day that our photo exhibit is out celebrating our February photo day, where many people from Goleta brought in pictures that they had representing the Goleta's past. And so please do feel free after tonight's forum, but also throughout the month of March, I think you're welcome to come back and enjoy these wonderful pictures that tell a story of Goleta's past from our own personal point of view. Many of the contributors to that are here tonight and also even on our panel, so it should be a very lively and happy discussion. So I'm very glad that we're also able to have tonight this Old Town Oral History Project Forum. And to introduce that, I'm going to introduce two people, the co-chairs of the Old Town Culture Project, Fermina Murray and Laura Funkhouser. And Laura will now introduce the project to tell you a little bit about what it's all about, and then we'll get started with our panel. So Laura.
Well, thank you all for coming this evening. This is pretty exciting for us because this is the first time that we have put it all together for an audience. And I have one brief matter of business to introduce Susanna Barbier, who is our Spanish translator, and she will now say a few words in Spanish in case there's anyone here who would like some Spanish translation.
Si hay alguien que habla solamente español, yo no puedo ayudar. Porque van a hablar aquí.
Thank you, Susanna. We're very fortunate to have Susanna working with us, and she has been at many of the events as part of the Community Heritage Project to provide Spanish translation in case there's anyone who wants to come who does not speak English. Now, to briefly introduce the Old Town Culture Project, I have to start with meeting Fermina Murray 2 years ago. And we met and we had the same idea that Old Town Goleta really had a lot of history that had not been written down. And we decided to apply for a grant with the Fund for Santa Barbara, which we received. And in trying to figure out how to get started, fortunately, Fermina, as a professional historian, knew exactly where to start. It was her idea to start with oral histories and to find people in Old Town who knew the history of Old Town, and we would interview them and record what they knew. And that was the place to start. So we applied for the grant with the Fund for Santa Barbara, and we received the grant. And then we enlisted David Russell, who became our partner in this project. And I just wanted to acknowledge David for countless hours of his own time, in addition to his full-time position at UCSB as the director of the UCSB Oral History Program. Thank you very much. And I have a few other members of our team here who have made this vision possible. One who is not here is Teresa Newton-Terres, and many of her family members are here tonight, and the Terres family has done a lot to help us bring all of this together for you. Another team member is Aurelia Madera, who is sitting right over here. Can you stand up, Aurelia? And of course, all of our team members are those who we have interviewed, and there are too many to name at this point for the sake of brevity, but pretty much anyone you can think of who has a business in Old Town has contributed in some way, and many of the longtime residents have contributed, and so many other members of the community have lent their support for in the industry community. So it's just been an amazing experience for us. I just wanted to say one more thing before I introduce Fermina Murray. After our panel discussion, we will show a 20-minute video of the Terres Family Film movies to a public audience, and you'll see lots of familiar scenes and maybe some that are strange and foreign, like they were to me when I first saw it. But I want to encourage you, if you see anyone you recognize, yell their name out. I will have a remote, and I can pause it if you want me to pause it. So hopefully, we can go through this together, and maybe we'll all learn something, and we can put some names to some of the people in the video. And I have to say, Terres is here with us tonight, and he's one of the cinematographers who contributed to the movies that we will see. And so maybe he can also narrate a little bit as we go. So with that, I want to thank you again and introduce Fermina Murray, who I think will say a couple of words and introduce David Russell. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lawrence. I just want to say that I actually sort of wear two hats. I'm also co-president of the Goleta Valley Historical Society, and as well as the Old Town Culture Project. And so we were very lucky that this heritage program came. So we are really partners with the Historical Society in doing the oral history. And so the oral histories that we have collected and will continue to collect will be archived at the Historical Society. And so along with the pictures and all that, so the two will be together. And so my real message to all of you is this is just the beginning. It's just the tip of the iceberg. And we get so excited, and there are so many stories, and there are many people who we have to reach out there and get the interviews. So if there's anybody in here who would like to be part of the project and help us do the interviews, we provide training for you. We also do follow-ups with different members of the community. And we hope that this is just the beginning, and as you will see tonight, the stories that they will share with you are very exciting. It will make you, we hope, will make you want to go and do your own stories and help us get the stories and come up with more books on Goleta. We only have one, Goleta the Good Land, and there's so many volumes that need to be written. So thank you very much for being here, and I'm gonna let David start on the session, and this is David Russell.
Thank you very much. Let me first of all introduce our panel. I'm going to introduce the panel first and do a brief introduction, just a brief introduction on oral history, what it means to produce some of the materials that we have here on the table. But first of all, we have Annie Peyote Canales here, Mary Cuevas Velasco, and Al Hamid. Yeah. These are the three people, and also Dr. Jack Retton, who will be coming up and talking about the transition period from the 50s to where we are today. But let me just first of all introduce what we mean by oral history and talk a little bit about it. My interest in the project grew as a result of watching the human footprint in the Goleta Valley begin to grow and grow and grow. And what we're seeing tonight is we're going to hear stories from people that can remember when Goleta was 101, not 101, but Hollister Avenue, and it was very small, and the rest was agricultural. But when we start to talk about the valley, there's some people that are not here tonight that we need to pay homage to, and the first would be the Shumash and that culture, and that's another part of our society that we have to go out and get interviews from and make this part of it, and then we can go on and on and on. So we have picked three to talk to tonight, but there are Japanese Americans, there are Chinese Americans, there are Spanish Americans coming from Spain, there are German Americans that are here, and so that we've also interviewed the Scots, who were the first Anglos basically to come to this valley, and we have many of those that we've also interviewed. So this is just a beginning, as Fermina talked about this, and we want to do more and more of this with the idea of producing documents that will speak from the bottom up. What was it like to be in the fields? What was it like to live in Old Town before it's been changed drastically? What are the family patterns that we could talk about? And one of the things that excites me is that what we will produce here is exactly what students need in the school. When they read the textbooks, they look upon them as being dead. In other words, that they're about someone in the East Coast, and when we talk about immigration patterns, what we're going to see here tonight is that everybody on this panel right here, the three, and I can't speak for Dr. Rutten, but I know myself, my mother came from Germany, Polish and German, depending upon what side of the family you want to talk about. But here we have Italy, Mexico, yeah? Yeah, Goleta, all right, with the family.
Right in the corner of Holland, Belgium.
Okay. And the thing that we could say that if we were in 1900, 1905, 1910, from the standpoint of most of the people that are here, the first language was German, Italian, Chinese, whatever. And so the other people that we should be talking to and studying today in reference to culture would be the Hmong people that are here now. So the beat goes on and on. What do we mean by doing an oral history? It's very, very simple. What we're going to be doing tonight is public. But what we really do when we collect stories is in the private. It's in a home with a tape recorder, usually sitting at a table, a kitchen table, and we're catching stories. And so what we're going to do tonight is to tell some of those stories. But keep in mind that when we talk to Annie, for example, and her two sisters, three sisters, but the two that did the interview, we were sitting at a table and we went on for almost 3 hours. And every hour is 30 pages, so you get the idea. We've got almost 100 pages of what family life was like up there on Holiday Hill, shall we say? Fairview, at the end of Fairview. So we would sit with a tape recorder, then we would tape the story, and then we come to this death machine. For anybody that's dealt with it, it's called a transcriber. And someone sits there and they transcribe it. And then they turn it into pages that are put into an archive box. And then this would be the individual chapters that would eventually come out of it. And then at the end, after you do a lot of editing and everything, then we come up with what we call an oral history, such as these and other examples. What we're experimenting with now at the university is this, CD-ROM. So this is like Northrup's interview that will be available, his voice. So you can, these will be available, people can just sit down and listen to it. This will be combined with the text and photographs. You might ask, why are they important? Look at the pictures. Who are they? This generation here can speak to who they are. Oh, that's so-and-so. Or you can go up, those of you that have been in school can go up there and look at any one of those school pictures and start picking out classmates. And events that you remember will come to life for you. But your children and the next generation, they might as well be in some secondhand store where you're going through photographs and no one can speak to that. So we're going to share some stories tonight, and keep in mind that no one up here, including myself, is a professional actor. So we're going to be dropping into their oral histories and asking them to tell stories, not the complete story, but just parts of stories. I want to start with Annie from this standpoint, because we talked about immigration patterns. A lot of history. You can go to UCSB, to this library right here, and start pulling books off the shelf. Immigration patterns for the Irish, immigration patterns for the Italians, for the Spanish, for Mexican Americans. And they have stereotypic things. Sometimes they know and some not. Some we will agree with tonight, some we will disagree with. But they are the stories. And so these stories will fit into or maybe object to what goes on. There was a great article Saturday in the New York Times about memory and history. And I think we're starting to get a little bit more respect. So let's start with Annie. And I'd like to have Annie tell the story of her mother's flight in Italy and how she got to America. Annie? If you can't hear, raise your hand and we'll try to speak up.
We're not going into how my grandparents came here in 1890 and farmed eventually and settled down. And then my grandfather was the last, in 1920 he passed away, and my dad was the only bachelor left with his siblings were all married. And so my Aunt Catherine, was Aunt Catherine Coyote Cavaletto, her and my Uncle GB went to Italy that same year, and when grandfather died, and so she went to Italy where they were all from, and she wrote a letter that we found the original, and we're sharing it, and I'm sure that nobody will mind because all the relatives have a copy now. And it's dated in June 1920. And she was in Italy now, her and my uncle, and she wrote this letter to my dad in Goleta, and he lived on Fairview, but the old house was on Fairview and La Goleta Road. It's still there. And anyway, the gist of the letter is that she wrote to my dad, and she said that he was alone, and she found this wonderful woman. She said she's a real nice lady, and he laughed and said she's not a starking beauty, but she's a great person, and she will make you a good wife on the farm. And I know you might not agree, but we're going to sponsor her and bring her home with us. And their home, my Uncle GB and Aunt Catherine lived on Stowe Canyon Road. It was one of the first or second tract houses that were built there. And so they brought her home to Goleta. And mind you, now, they were not young. My dad was almost 40, and my mother was 35. And she lived with her family over there, and in those days, her oldest brother, in maybe a lot of the European countries or whatever, he accumulated everything that was the family's, and he was the boss in the household, and he was married and had children, and Mom was the old maid that lived with them, and she had to go to work and just stay with them. So she was afraid to come, but they talked her into it, and she thought, well, it's going to be a new life and a new challenge for her, and she would have relatives here. Well, not her relatives, but anyway, she knew them from Italy. They all came from the same area. So anyway, she came here in the first part of November, I guess, I'm not sure. They brought her, and she lived with my aunt and uncle, of course, and my dad went over to visit many times, and we laughed because he said after a few weeks, and he was a bachelor living in the old homestead, and he said, well, we know why you're here. He said, you want to get married or don't you? We've all heard this because she told it many times, you know, and so she was game, and so they were married, and this photo up here is my mother and dad in the front, and my dad behind him is his sister was Aunt Catherine, and she married G.B. Cavaletto. And they brought her over, and so of course they stood up for her. They were married at the old Catholic church downtown Goleta on the corner of Fairview and Hollister, where the Jiffy Lube now. I know where that is. Well, that's where the Catholic church was there. And they were married there. And then when they got married, why they came back to the old farmhouse, you know. And
Annie, in reference to the letter, if it doesn't work out, what did they say in the letter?
oh
that she
yeah.
wrote?
Well, she was worried, of course, apprehensive about coming. But my Aunt Catherine told her then Montecito was expanding, and there were a lot of big estates and wealthy people. And if it didn't work out, she would always be able to get a job doing household, working in the household, you know, a maid or cook or somewhere in the estates, you know. So she thought, well, that was an alternative. And so she came, and she came to the old farmhouse, and I could go on and on, but that was the basic of it. And she lived there, and they worked hard. They worked hard, and they had 5 children, and we all worked hard. He wanted a boy, everyone. Oh, another girl. We better be a boy, and we were all girls, 4 girls, so we worked like boys. We were all born and raised there, and until my mother passed away. She was widowed many years after my dad died, and we eventually sold the ranch like all the Coyotes were. The Coyotes had the corner on Fairview because grandfather, when he died, then the 5 Coyotes, them inherited their section.
Now, in reference to that, you can see we can go right down the panel here and repeat this story. Not the same story, but a similar story. Of couples meeting, coming, farming, merchants, whatever. And built this community. We're the founders of it. Mary is on the panel, can say that she was born on
Pine Avenue, third house.
Could you talk about
I
it?
was born on Clancy's house on the.
Okay.
Okay. It's the third house from Hollister and Pine. It used to be a little white house with a porch on the front. Now it's a parking lot.
Yeah. would ask, here we're trying to piece things together. So one of the things we did in this interview was to ask Mary to talk about the Contreras family, from the standpoint of what she remembered about them, because they played a very big role in her family moving to a place that was called
Gato Prieto.
right,
Which is
right.
And it was like a field
Right.
and a house here and a house there.
Right.
And there was the old house of the Valdivia, Florencio and Cruz Valdivia, right there where the Delta Dios, I guess my cousin's here, he used to live there. There. And that was, and you were born there. And that was the Valdivia, and then later on, some other kids got married to the Plasencias and Lopez, which were right around that little area.
But when we talk about that community there,
Yeah.
right, which when you look there now, what you see are light industry across from the airport. But at one time, that was a village. Little homes that were in there. And where Pine Street is, looking towards what we would now say the airport, is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Could you speak to that community just a little bit?
Okay, from Gato Prieto?
Yeah.
Okay. Also, I thought that it was named Gato Prieto, which means black cat, because I thought somebody had a black cat. And what I hear was, remember your mother, your aunt over here, Cruz, she belongs to the Cruz family. Her mother's the one that gave you the journal?
Yes.
And, okay, and anyway, they were saying the name came because during that night, they used to gamble in this little house there. And then, only at night, I guess they used to go and gamble there. And it was illegal probably. So that's how it got the name, Gato Prieto, because it was at night, dark, they used to carry the little lantern.
But your family, after that, will move across to what is called
Okay,
Ocean,
they lived there and then to Alwood.
which was called,
Doty's Ranch, and then from there to Ocean Terrace.
okay, Ocean Terrace. And Ocean Terrace is what we call today
Isla Vista.
Isla Vista. And could you talk about the house that you lived in and how you, because this goes back to the Contreras family
Yes.
and what they did to help your
Okay,
family.
when we moved from Elwood, Mr. Doty gave the old house to my dad and the Contreras. In those days, they used to help each other. They tore the house down, and I think we stayed over at Sexton's with Mr. Pat Munoz's house, or the Contreras part-time, the family right there in Hollister and Pine. While they moved the old house toward the park, moved it to Ocean Terrace, and all the Contreras boys helped build that. The house where we used to live in Ocean Terrace.
A sense of community.
Yeah, and,
Gil Garcia talks about, when we interviewed him, he talks about his street, and he went down house from house to house, his best friends. And his best friend in school was a white boy that lived across the street from him, whose father was a watchman within the town. And he talked about that relationship and what that actually meant to him. We will talk more about community and more about neighborhoods a little bit later on, but I thought we'd move to Al, because Al, you were born on
The potato ranch.
yes. Could you talk a little bit about your family's immigration patterns? Because here what we're seeing is we're doing, from a historian's perspective, you do a swatch of interviews, as many as you can. Like if we were to interview all the Mexican-American families here. And what we're seeing, I'm seeing anyway, as I go from Gil's family to another, is that Colorado is a place where people went first. And also we associate it with the fact that they weren't just doing farm work in many cases. So Al, could you talk about kind of like your grandfather's experience and how they finally got to Goleta?
Okay, Grandpa and Grandma migrated to the United States from Mexico, the state of Guanajuato. It was during the Revolution. So Grandpa told Grandma, let's go to the United States because it's getting kind of dangerous around here. So they migrated to Colorado. In 1915, they were there. Mom was born there, my uncles were born there. And then Grandpa Dad had a couple of acres. He raised beets. And when the beet season was over, he would go to work at the steel mills in Pueblo and Denver. After that, Grandpa got kind of itchy feet, so he said, let's move to California. So they moved to Brawley, which is down here by Palm Springs, somewhere over here. Okay, from there, he worked in the fields, picking watermelons, cantaloupes, dates, whatever came up. He was there working. All the family was there working. So then again, he got itchy feet again, so he said, let's move down to California. And they came to Goleta. And he started to work at the Williams Ranch. The Williams Ranch, and then I was born there and raised there. And then from there, we went to the Bishop Ranch. We used to go to the Bishop Ranch to pick walnuts. And Dad started to work there with my tío Chencho, which I believe one of my friends is here that belongs to the family. Ron? Oh, there he is. Yeah, he joined my family. And he worked there picking walnuts too. The whole family picked walnuts too. We used to go to school with, is right over there on the top, the old school. The old school.
Which we're gonna go into and we'll develop. So you see Al's pattern there being somewhat different, but yet in essence the same from that standpoint. As we're going down here, I don't mean that I'm cutting people off, but we've got a whole agenda that we're trying to do. And once you start, and I also hope that you see that as like when Mary was looking at me, and the idea of oral history is that you have to have eye contact, and that you're looking at the person, and that you're really catching a story, and that you care, and that you listen. Good oral history is listening, and being able to elicit someone to tell stories. In many cases, stories that are very personal. Is an example for Al, which we're not going to go into, but he served in World War II. Dr. Rutten served in World War II. And if we were to interview both of them on that aspect, whether it be the tank corps in Germany or whatever, we could take that chapter and put it in the book that's been selling and making millions around, the book that the NBC, Brokaw did. It's the same thing. We see these stories going over and over again. Now we want to shift, and you can see that we can go, no matter how many different families that we've talked to, such as like Gil Garcia is an example. Some of the stories that he told was like at 9 years of age being sent up to Gilroy to pick lettuce, and he talks about how you got your field and what you did, and how at the end of the day it all had to be green and it couldn't be the other way around, and how he plotted it out and everything. It's 9 years of age. So we could go on and on and on with these stories, but now I'd like to turn to work and what it was like to be in this valley and to work. Annie, you mentioned the standpoint that Annie's farm was a little bit different than the Williams farm and the Bishop farm from the standpoint that the people that were doing the work on the Peyote farm, well, they're right here in the front row. Right? Peyote, yes. The four that were right here in the... right. Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about what it was like for you as a young girl to grow up on this and what your responsibilities were?
Well, we had a small farm compared to, like he said, the holdings where they worked on the farms. And this was my dad's portion that he inherited from his grandfather. And then, my mother came and we were all born and raised there. Well, as soon as we were old enough to walk or do anything, my brother was the oldest, and so of course then he had to work, and then we were all just a year and a half apart. And we were born and raised on that farm, and we had lima beans was a popular agricultural crop in those days. It was good for the climate, I guess, and some of the spare land. And most of ours was also in walnuts. Walnuts were a big thing in Goleta. everybody had mullets and lima beans. And this is before lemons and avocados. And so we had to work, and we were in essence the same as them. We lived under it, but we had to pick walnuts. We picked walnuts every year. And we went to school, and as soon as school was out, why, we had to hurry home because we had chores to do. And when it was bean season, we had to hoe weeds, and like I say, my dad didn't feel, well, he didn't make enough money for 5 kids, so he leased other lands that were available from absentee owners. And at that time, we leased farmland, and 1/3 clear profit went to the owner, and 2/3 was for the farmer. But out of that, he had to pay all his expenses, and of course, we had free labor, and we had to work, and so we did that many years. We can point out different tract houses now where there was different land.
Even the one where you're living now, you talked about the first tract that went in. Kellogg tract.
Yeah.
Did you used to?
Yes, I live in Old Town Goleta, where I've lived over 50 years, and we're on a dead-end street, and it runs right into Kellogg Tract. You know where Kellogg Tract is? It's opposite the Goleta School, Goleta Community Center. Well, that was all a bean field. Well, it was vacant land. Anyway, my dad leased that for quite a few years, and he planted lima beans there. And we went and pulled weeds there, and then, you know, I don't know, I'm not gonna go into cutting the lima beans, but we had to pile beans, and they had these old thrashers. You'll look at the pictures, and we had to have piles in the row after they were cut. We had pitchforks, and then not everybody had a thrasher, and my Uncle John Coyote had a thrasher, and they went around to the smaller areas and thrashed other people's beans for them and everything. So that was one big acreage. That was all empty right up to the walnut orchard that Nuts had that years ago, where Carpetary is, and all of that was, farmland, clear back.
For us now, for one of the problems that we had is doing the oral histories is to try and find out where the various ranches were, because they change from time to time. What we'd like to do now is I'd like to turn to Al to talk a little bit about the process of, let's take the walnut tree itself, and how did you harvest walnuts, and then what it meant to the people. Mary can talk about what it was like to pick up walnuts, what it did to your hands, and what it meant when you went to school and things of this nature. Al, how did they harvest the walnuts? Because you watched this, right?
Yes.
And on the Bishop Ranch, and could you talk a little bit about your uncle and what he used?
Okay, my uncle was the foreman there. Every year, people used to come to the ranch to harvest the walnut. From Santa Paula, Ventura, Oxnard, all these little cities around here. They would come to the camp, which the camp was located way into the canyon. So every morning the truck would come and pick all of us up and take us to the orchard. It's cold in the mornings too, it's foggy. And in the orchard they had large shakers, like bamboo with a hook. We used to carry it around all day. Not me as a bull, my dad and the rest of them. And in order to get the walnuts to come down, you would get that shaker and find a good solid branch and start shaking. Here comes the ripe walnuts down. But you didn't want to shake too much because you would bring the green walnut down. And Uncle would get very upset about that. Because he wanted to come back 2 or 3 times more to harvest.
To the same tree.
To the same tree. And we would go to school, and in for a half a day, and after that, later in the afternoon, we would go over there and help our folks harvest the walnuts.
Sometimes when Pee Wee would come to pick you
Oh,
up.
Pee Wee. That boy, he never gave up, boy. He used to go over there and wait for the bus for us to come in. Tony Silva.
Oh, yeah.
He was the school bus driver.
Yeah.
And we would hide from him, so we won't have to go to work. But Pee Wee, that's what we call him Chief because that man was a track star. He chased us all over. One by one, he would catch us, put us in the truck,
And you went to work.
and went to work. But he had a lot of fun too. And he would take us back into the canyon, start helping the folks harvest the lawn.
Mary, in reference to the actual process of picking your lawn and stuff, could you talk about, that's pretty backbreaking work.
Oh,
And what
yes.
was it like for you, and what did it do to your hands?
Black. So we used to go, the whole family, and Mr. Contreras, Jose used to shake him, and here we were picking them in buckets, and my mother used to put them because they didn't have those,
Before the
uh-huh,
walnut
yeah.
Yes.
So we used to make a big pile for mother so she could get on, and there we were. And then sometimes we used to go with Mr. Pat Munoz, and he used to shake the trees, and his family, and us used to go and pick all the ones. And some people from Santa Barbara families, they used to come and work.
How old were you when you first went into it?
I was early 40s. I was born in 1930, so I was about 9, 10, or younger when we used to go. And then we used to go half a day to the Lana Picker School up there by between Patterson, and then there's a little street up on the end of La Sumida. There was this old building there, school. So we used to go there half a day. From there, they used to take us to work, pick walnuts out in the fields.
Now, we could do the same thing with lemons and with all the other crops, which we have done. Mr. Trancosa, for an example, talks about what it was to smudge when he was there. And for anybody that doesn't, we probably forgot about that, but he talked about going to the owner and being and standing there and say, well, should we do it? Well, when it gets down to 31, 32, and then to have like a huge ranch, and then to have to run through and to light those. It's cold, it's near freezing, and he says the weeds would be high, and as he was running through, he'd be getting wet. And by the time that they were all lit, when he came back in, he was just sopping, wet from that standpoint. But to listen to him and to read as he tells that story, and we could go on and on with beans, and we could go on with the other materials that we've talked about within agriculture community, which we have in the oral histories, and it's pretty well documented, which goes along with the running of the. Al tells a very great story of what it was like in the Bishop Ranch when it was too hot during the day, and they would hook the big lights up at night, and they would be out harvesting beans, and with the big wheel with the machine that was turning it in order to be able to thrash the beans. But enough for work, except for one thing. We have a lot of great stories about the lemon packing house and what it was actually like to work in the lemon packing house. Annie, would you like to tell a short story about that and what it was like? Because we want to go to school, and then we also want to go to the town itself and talk about some of the stores and things, and then World War II, which we will end tonight.
Well, all the kids in our age, now this is in the 40s, the early 40s, and on after school, not after school, in the summertime, when we weren't needed at home, well, most of us worked, and all 4 of us sisters worked, and all our friends at the Goleta Packing House. And it was there next to the Williams Ranch. Everybody knows where the old Goleta lemon house was. And there's a picture right here. We packed lemons, and I know I packed lemons, and we'd have different jobs, and my 2 sisters there, they worked, and they put labels, glue and labeled all those boxes, and my other sister worked on a grading melter when they washed them. And all the kids, that was a good job. And we made 25 cents an hour, and that was $2 a day. And we remember 2 sisters, they got to go to work at the lemon house, and they got $2 an hour. And my sister Kathy, $2 a day. Oh my God, yeah. And Catherine and I had to stay home and work with my dad. And 16 to work. So, yeah, because they were 16. Well, she was big enough she could pass for 16.
But what did she have to do with the money?
Well, this is it. They made the money, and Katie and I had to stay home and work with my dad. But this $2 a day we shared, so we all had $1 a day, and we were lucky if we worked all summer, and we had to buy all our school clothes and our shoes and things. And so we got buy. And that's, you know, everybody had to bread was 10 cents a loaf.
Yeah.
And shoes and things were not what they are now.
And,
So
and we're just touching on these stories. I mean, there's an awful lot. I mean, for an example, when the horses went, they have the stalls, and so what did the stalls become?
Playhouse.
Playhouse. each one of them, they had their playhouse.
In the barn, in the big barn, yeah.
Right.
My dad had work horses, and I think he was one of the last poor farmers in Goleta to have work horses. Everybody was buying tractors, and he finally was able to buy a tractor. John Deere, they had a big tractor shop in Goleta where Santa Cruz Market is now. And so then without the horses, well, they didn't have the hay and stuff, and they had all these stalls. It was built for the horses and stuff. And in our spare time, we each had a playhouse in one of the stalls. We cleaned out the stalls and had a playhouse.
Now, I'm leading Annie here, but there was a very wealthy family that owned a ranch that was, and the chauffeur used to drive by, and last night you were telling the story of when Christmas time would come, they would.
Well, we lived next door to the Franklin Ranch. It was Dr. Franklin at that time, and he was a wealthy eye doctor, whatever. And so they always waved, and as neighbors, you know. And but every Christmas, and here we were, my brother too, and we were 5 little kids, and they didn't know which was which. And every Christmas time, the chauffeur would drive up and have 5 packages for Christmas delivery. And, we were all excited, we'd bring them in, you know, and of course I suppose we didn't wait till Christmas. But he never remembered, maybe one year there was 3 dolls and 2 trucks. Next year there was 4 dolls and 1 truck, or, yeah, and we all have a lot of those. They were too nice, my mother wouldn't let, they have a pair of dolls, well they all have, they were too nice and my mother would not let us play with them. We have a lot of old things that she made us save, and then when we got old enough, and she got older, and we got married and went on, she said, well, this is yours and this is yours. We remembered getting them, yeah.
Now the next thing we're going to move to, we could go on and on with these stories of this nature, but we want to move on to school. And that was a very important part of everybody's life. And one of the things that we know, and this kind of proves the point, that we, Chaim and a whole host of historians have talked about the American school system as really being the place where the melting pot existed. You came as the first generation, I'm first generation, everybody here is first generation. But it was in the school where we lost our accents, where as my mother was sent off to school with an apron on that she had to wear, she didn't like it, she would be taking it off. And everybody had to break cultural bind to become one from that standpoint. And where are we one today, right? So what I wanted to do was to briefly talk about the school, just with some early remembrance of what it was like to go to Goleta Valley School, keeping in mind that in each one of these oral histories we have like 20, 30 pages that deals with these experiences. Let's start with Mary. Your first, and one of the things that you'll see is the fear that some had to go to school. And when we looked at it, we saw that there was a special school, was it? Can you talk about that special school? Yeah, well, the school that you went from the standpoint of not being able to speak English. Yeah, okay.
Used to live in Elwood, and we walked to school, Elwood School. I did not know a word in English. So I had to go to the girls' room, I would get up and sit down. Sit down, no, it was my first day of school. And then I would stand up again to go, because I didn't know how to say, I want to go to the restroom. And just said, sit down, young lady. So I would sit down. Guess what? So then she had it clean, and I was little, so she had it, I still remember that. And she had it clean. After that, she said, you go anytime you want. But my brother went there, and my sister, they knew English, but I didn't. I didn't.
Annie, your experience as far as language was concerned?
Yes, we all went to Goleta School at Goleta, and no kindergarten then, so we were all 6 years old, and my brother was the oldest, so he went to school first, and so he did not, my mother spoke Italian, my dad spoke the Spanish and with all the workers, and Italian and English, of course.
Chinese.
And, yeah, Chinese, he worked with the Chinese on the railroad. But anyway, so we spoke Italian at home, and my brother was the oldest, and he went to Goleta school and didn't know a word of English. And they tell the story, my folks used to all the time, my cousin, the Coyote, was about 6 years older than my brother, and he was in Goleta school. And Tony followed him around all the time until they put him in his own class, you know. And so by the end of the year, he learned a little bit, but he was held back. And then the next year, Dolly, my sister, went, and she had begun to learn, you know, a little bit. And she didn't know too much either, because we still spoke Italian at home. And then by the time my other two sisters and I went, well, you learn, and we spoke English, because then we began to speak it at home.
So that we have that. Joe Kuntz is the example. His parents were German. He went to school. He didn't speak any English at all, only German. He had a similar experience in that way. Now, you could say that, well, this was the pattern that did exist. Alan, what about your experience? Did you speak English?
Oh yes, my mom and dad, mostly my mom, she spoke to us in English all the time. So that was just about our first language.
Mhm.
And then after dad say, well, I think you better learn how to speak Spanish too, because one of these days you're going to use it. And they started to talk to us in Spanish. And when I went to school, well, I went to the same school you did over here. And that one over there. That was the walnut school. And we got along with the kids real good. I can say that.
I point this out because we can see patterns, and we can also jump to conclusions as historians that this was, in essence, what was going on when we first saw this. And we thought, well, this is just a school for Spanish children, but we're here. And then as we started to do the interviews, we could see that it just wasn't Spanish children. It was Italian children that were having problems with language, German children, and I'm sure the Chinese children and other children were having the same languages in that way. We won't get into the feelings that people have as to how we should deal with bilingual education today. There's many, many stories that we can tell about this. Let me just turn to Annie for one story, because I know we're running out of time here quick. How are we on time, boss? Okay, Annie, talk about one teacher, and because we've actually gone down the list of all the teachers that were there, and there were some good ones and there were some mean ones.
Well, everybody has a favorite. We were in the era in Goleta School where many of the teachers taught there for many years, so you can talk to almost anybody in our age group, and we all had the same teachers. And we had Mrs. Stevens, that I'm sure lots of you people know, and she was very good and compassionate. Everybody loved her. And, well, I won't name them all, but then there was a Miss Miller, and she was not a Goleta person. Later she was married, and she was Mrs. Holloway. And we all had her, and she was very strict. And it was in those days, and she had a paddle, and boy, I don't ever remember a girl getting spanked. Maybe the girls were more timid. But boy, she paddled those boys on the hand, and she paddled them. So she had quite a reputation. Everybody said, I think she was fourth grade teacher or something. And everybody, like if we were in second, third graders, oh, wait till you get on. But she had that kind of reputation. I'm sure we all learned, and all of them were there many years. And we all had Mrs. Bingham as the first grade teacher, and she's in a picture over there. And she was there for many, many years.
Well, there's another story that everybody told, and that was that when the Goleta children went off to Santa Barbara, where they finally had to go to school, they were referred to as what? Hicks. Was that serious?
Well, I don't think it bothered us. It wasn't done maliciously. It was the way it was. We all, wherever we lived, we had to walk to Hollister, and there was one bus, because all the school classes started at the same time, one bus that went to LaCoumber Junior High School, and then the others, they had another bus that went to Santa Barbara High School, because we only had LaCoumber 1 year, because you remember, Goleta was through the 8th grade when we were in school. And so we all had to ride buses eventually. And when we were all Goleta, it didn't bother. When we get in town, they'd say, oh, here comes all the Goleta Hicks, But nevertheless, all the Goleta boys were star football players.
Al, anything you want to say about the school from the standpoint of what you remember about it?
Well, it was nice going to Goleta School because we used to have so much fun. You know, we were going to the school in the back, not the Goleta Union School itself, so after. And I remember the principal, Mr. Kaywood. He was a big guy.
Yeah, we were scared.
And he meant business. And during them years, we all had a lot of fun. We had our own baseball field. We used to go out on little hikes. And at noontime, we would all sneak out to the Osuna store and buy pies or something on credit. And then he would charge it to my dad. And from there, I went to, after the long season with Bishop Ranch work, we moved to Santa Barbara.
So you went to school there.
Junior high school and high school.
Mary? Any stories about Goleta?
Well, from Elwood, I went to Goleta,
Yes.
back in the little old building,
Uh-huh.
and then the front, and I met Mrs. Ryan. She was another
Yeah.
story, but I had
She
her
was
for
the-
2 years, and she was nice to me. And then Mrs. Hill in the 8th grade from there. A few girls from there went to junior high, the other ones to La Cumbre. But we used to go to high school and then walk down the hill to junior high. And then at night, after school was over, we used to walk up the hill and high school and get the bus there to come to Goleta.
How'd you get to go to Santa Barbara?
I guess there were too many.
Because everybody from Goleta, I thought, went to La Cumbre.
No, it was the first year when I went.
I didn't know that.
One of the
Not by
special
much.
one of the special things that you had with the games where you would was it once a year where you had
We called them play dates.
play dates and play dates where they would compete with other schools from other areas, Santa Maria and things of that nature. And there's a lot of stories about that went on. And we could continue on with that, but we want to turn now to the town. I've listed some things here: dues store, coffees, market, Jim Smith, the blacksmith, everybody that's here, including Dr. Retton, which Dr. Retton's at the end is going to give us the transition period. That's what we wanted him for, from the standpoint that he came here in the 50s as a doctor, what it was like. But they all knew this man, walked by it, and maybe somebody even talked to him from time to time. The Rexall Pharmacy, and Asuna's Market, and then Dago and Maria Terres, their department store that was there. But let's start with Asuna's Market. Al, is this a special place?
Oh, we used to love to go there.
Why was it?
Goodies. And he was such a great man.
Yeah.
Kind, you couldn't find another person as kind. Well, anyway, he used to give credit to all the people that were picking on us during the season. Anytime people wanted credit, he would go over there and gladly give you credit. He would even ask you where you work and nothing. He knew that we were from Brandon because of our hands. And it was just great to trade with him. Mom and Dad used to trade with him a lot. Uncle Chancellor used to trade with him for many years. I believe everybody in Goleta used to trade with him.
When I did the interview with Mr. Trancosa in the store, as we were standing there, people were coming in and they were doing the same thing. I mean, it was, they were just picking up items and they were writing the name down, and that's the way they did business. It was in many farm communities and many small communities in America, and some very, very wealthy communities back east, they still have, which you run account. You don't pay for it when you come up, they write it down, and then once a month they send you the bill.
And after walnut season, well, didn't get the money over here, and then we put up proposals or students and pay them out.
I'm going to name some, just going to run down this list and ask people to, what you remember about it. Judith store?
Oh, I remember he was a little boy playing on, it was just a dirt road in Hollister, and he would be in front of the new house, playing out there in the dirt. He was just about 3 or 4 years old. He probably doesn't remember me though. And then Jimmy Diego was in school with my brother, who were just a year apart, my brother and me. He's the one that was in the accident, working for Radiant, where I was working too.
Coffee's Market.
Oh, wow.
Oh,
Coffee's Market was the place in Goleta, and everybody went to Coffee's Market, and they ran a tab for many people, and they knew everybody, and they knew who, that everybody was good for it. I'm sure those that weren't, they didn't charge. But that was there many, many years, a very popular place.
And they would deliver too.
They delivered.
And what did they deliver in?
Oh, I have to tell you, well, Bill Coffey was our age in school, and when he was old enough to drive, then he delivered for coffees. People would phone in an order, and I know on the Franklin Range there, they always had a big order, and it had a red panel truck that said coffees on it. And we were the entrance, the Franklin Range had to pass our house, and he'd be driving, and he'd drive like a bad everybody'd get out of the way. He was the delivery boy. But he and he had an older sister. They all went to school here, and I don't know when they came, but they had the grocery store ever since I can remember. And Mrs. Coffey is still alive.
Where we used to go,
Yeah.
got to get them.
Did you go there? The coffees?
Even my brother was run down by a car going to that store.
Was he really?
And there was one of those old-fashioned cars with a tiny wheel. Nothing happened, so the lady got all scared, took a watermelon for him.
No sooner. Did any of you remember anything about Jim Smith? Other than watching him, did you?
Yes, watching him.
Yeah.
Well, all the farmers took equipment there. My dad used to go, and we lived a mile away, and whenever you had to go to Goleta for anything, if you had to go to Jim Smith or to the grocery store or anything, well, we all wanted to go because that was our treat. We'd get, he'd give us a nickel for an ice cream or something. So but he went, all the farmers went to Jim Smith. That was the only blacksmith in town, and he repaired everything.
Al, do you remember anything about him?
Oh,
Did you ever stop and talk, or was he one to talk for?
My father-in-law was working for him.
Oh, really?
At one time. He worked there for a few years. And he really enjoyed the work there too. Mr. Smith was a real kind gentleman. And I used to go in there sometimes when I used to come down from the ranch, pay him a visit. But I used to live wander all over town.
What we've done with each one of the informants is that we've gone down Hollister Avenue and went from store to store and asked them to remember what they remember about it, whether they either went in there, did their folks trade with them. And in the case of Annie, for example, we have in her story receipts that she paid for items that were purchased, and we had one that was for taxes, right? For the ranch tax, which was
$9.
$9 for
This
the
was
whole
my
thing.
grandfather.
yeah.
For all the property, and that was a good 100 acres or so on Fairview there, and it was the tax from the Santa Barbara courthouse and everything for a year. And first installment, he paid $5.
One of the favorite watering holes for young people was the Rexall Pharmacy because of the fountain. You remember that? Anybody stories there? These are, everybody tells them, but the idea of having ice cream and soda.
There's a picture there on the fountain. I know a lady called me and asked me if that was my brother, but that was my cousin Tony Coyote and Mary Coyote, and it's a note on there. Whenever we go, and even in the late 40s, I was married in the middle 40s, and we lived in Goleta, and Andy and I go in there all the time, and Chili, of course, everybody knew Chili knew he was a great gambler. And you'd walk in, you get a Coke, I don't care what you want. I mean, at the counter, not the merchandise.
Yeah.
And he'd say, double or nothing. They'd always flip, and you'd get a Coke.
You would get it going.
Yeah. Go ahead, they did it with them all the time, you guys did.
And one of the pastimes now was to go down and this was, when we say this now, it's going to sound like, but to watch the trains come in. And was that You do that too?
There was a watermelon patch there on Kellogg Avenue, I can remember. And we used to go there and swipe a,
Yeah.
we used to swipe a watermelon, sit down and watch the trains pass
We weren't working all the time, and so there was some recreation, a lot of recreation in fact. And Goleta Beach was something that people would want to go to. Annie?
Yeah, well, Goleta Beach was number one, and that was the only recreation, because we never got to go to the movies in Santa Barbara. You know, some kids probably did, but whenever we weren't working, or if we finished our chore early, well, we'd get to go to Goleta Beach, and it was fun. That was, whenever we weren't working and the weather was good, like, Goleta Beach was it. And you knew everybody there, and they had swim meets. They finally had a man come out from the Rex in Santa Barbara when we were just, 10, 12, and whatever, and they would teach swimming lessons and things, and they would have get-togethers, and they'd have the swim meets on Sunday, and that's the time when our coach would come too, because, my mother was afraid of the water, I guess, coming over on the big boat from Italy or whatever she's doing, so she wanted us to learn to swim, but she would come down there, and they were proud. We all got our blue ribbons. It was aged groups, and so Goleta Beach was, all our fond memories are Goleta Beach.
And there was a barge or something that a raft that they had out there.
Yeah, they had a rope out from the beach out, I don't know how many yards now, and we weren't supposed to go out there until we could swim, but then, that was a long ways. We'd hang on the rope, go out on the thing and jump off and stuff, but everybody in Goleta Beach enjoyed, Goleta.
Al, fishing?
We used to walk from the house, I was about 10 years old. Me and my uncle would walk across the blue there, and we would come across some steelhead like this, big steel.
It's how to go up, and he went down like that, close to the ship, so they got him. And then one time, another one, right there on Pine, in the back there was some walnut trees. This pilot was hanging up there, the airplane crashed, and there were a lot of crashes.
Yeah, we've a lot of those are
And it was
documented.
noisy all day long,
Yeah.
where we lived.
And one of the things about World War II, and again, we have a lot of stories about this, was the German prisoner of war camps. And a lot of them worked within the various fields, picking lemons, etc. Al, you remember actually meeting some of the German soldiers that were working with you alongside in doing this. Do you want to relate some of those stories?
They were the first German prisoners they had when they caught them over there in Germany and brought them over here to
That was a couple of years.
Yeah.
And they worked in the lemon orchard. I was going to junior high school part-time, and they used to pick us up there and bring us down to the orchards to pick lemons. And that's when the German prisoners were also picking lemons here. I believe that their camp was over there a few miles down up
And
north of
Capitan.
Capitan by there. As a matter of fact, you can still see the tower there. The tower is still standing up where they had the camp. And they were real friendly. They were, what you call me, they were very young. Oh, I'd say 17. They were very young. They were the first ones they brought over. And I got along with them real good. Everybody got along with them real good. They got fed real good. They had their outfits that said G in the back, But they were real kind people. I guess they were glad to get over here.
Andy's family, as an example, actually had, there were some Italian prisoners here too, right?
Yes, there were.
And-
Some people I talked to, they don't even remember, but we didn't meet any personally, but I knew they were, because I had my girlfriend in high school, and that was in the 40s, and she was Italian, and most of you remember Mom's Italian Village in Santa Barbara, and they hosted many, well, they invited all these Italian Italian prisoners there. And my girlfriend she married one of the prisoners. So that's how I know they were there. I don't know anything about the camps or when and how they got here, but I know that they had a camp there.
Now, at the end of, and we're going to close this down, but Dr. Redden can talk about, he comes here after his service in World War II. Dr. Redden, do you want to come up and talk about a very important part of our story is that World War II is over and we're getting back to normalcy, but Dr. Redden's story really bridges the gap because I'm sure amongst everybody here, can remember him as an old-timer and someone that's been here and part of the community before it began to grow. But I'd like him to tell two stories. One would be well, first of all, could you talk about opening up your first office in downtown Goleta?
One of the things I want to say, Dave,
Yes.
is that when you said about eye contact, that's one of the reasons I sat back there.
Yeah.
To watch these people.
Right.
This is marvelous. Happened to come here kind of by circumstance and happenstance. I was Navy World War II, and then when I graduated from medical school, my designators changed course, and I'd only put in 19 months in World War II, so I was back in the Navy because I was Navy Reserve. My father was Navy Reserve from World War I. Navy, same time, same place, matter of fact. But when I was getting out of the Navy after World War II, went back to my hometown in Langdon, North Dakota. Laura is also from Langdon, North Dakota. Our family had kind of come apart when my dad went into the Navy in World War II because my two sisters went to State Scholastic College in Duluth, Minnesota. My mother and I went out to his sister's place in Van Nuys, and I graduated from a private high school. So when the war was over, I took my first year of pre-med at UCLA, and I went back to work on a farm. And it was her brother-in-law's farm, and so I met Laura back there. She knew my dad because he'd been a dentist for those years. And so we started, I changed schools. I went to University of North Dakota.
Right.
In the year that I graduated from the University of North Dakota pre-med, and started medical school there, we were married. And so we had 2 years in North Dakota at Grand Forks because they just had a 2-year school there. There weren't enough people for hands-on for the senior medical students, and so we had to transfer. We transferred to Oregon. And then as soon as I graduated back into the Navy, and we were down at San Diego Naval Hospital, and that's where our first son was born down there. And I served out my time then from down there. I think it was an extra about 1 year and then about another 7 months, I think it was. And I was out. Where do I go to practice? Where do we go to practice? Little notice from a man up in Gillette, Wyoming, and he invited us to come up there. We went up to see him in Gillette, Wyoming, halfway between Rapid City and Sheridan. And he had a nice 17-bed hospital right on the main highway there. And he had an awful lot of trauma stuff there. And the second day that I was there, helping him finish up with his elective surgery, he said, "Jack, I'm going to go back to the East Coast and take my residency in anesthesiology." We had Randy with us up at the baby. We packed up that night and went back to San Diego. Yeah, I could just see me again, not out there. So anyway, one of the first things I looked at when I got in there was I picked up the physician placement board. California physician placement board. There was a man down in a place called Goleta that had a satellite OBGYN practice out there. So, see, that's good up. Gosh, Santa Barbara, I've been up here before, I said, "Oh, you right that place." So I called Bert Peter. He came up here. Everything was arranged with Bert. He did it off right away. And as a matter of fact, his satellite office was in David Terres and Mary's building. And so Diego was my landlord. And they came up here and started our practice. The university was just being built. Laura was curious about where we were going to go to practice. All our docs wanted us to come into Santa Barbara, of course. You're nuts if you go out to Goleta. There's only 3,000 people living out there. There was one doctor here, Lee Streeter was the doctor.
Could you speak down a little bit? What was he? You knew him and
I knew him quite well, yeah. As a matter of fact, he invited me to come into his practice. Bert was, I owe the responsibility to Bert. To do what he wanted. we did then bring in one of my classmates at the University of Oregon Med School, came here, Don Boots. He's about the third one.
Remember Dr. Boots?
He's a classmate of mine. So he had written to me, what's it like in Goleta? That's how he happened to get to be here. And it was very interesting. I have my first little appointment book that when I used to write down, or actually Carly Gady was my office assistant at the time, and she'd write down the appointments that I'd have, and she kept the books and everything. And that one little book that I had was about the first 8 months, I guess, that I was in practice. For me, it had pages, and she's had, and that was amazing.
So you want to put in the book that would be new too.
Yeah, it was, but it was a very, very nice place. The people
Now you were
very
living,
friendly.
Doctor, you were living on
Mandarin.
Mandarin. Small house.
Ernie Hensley was the real estate man. It was really hard to find. They talk about affordable housing now. It was really straight. Here comes the university, and then about that time we started to get like Raytheon, and some of those people were coming in, and I think we went from 3,000 people to about 30,000 people in about 8 years.
When you first opened your practice, can you talk about what it was like to build a practice in a small agriculture community? Because here you're coming from a large naval hospital, probably the largest naval hospital maybe in the world. I don't know. It's very, very big. Yeah, 3,000 beds. Was it difficult?
No, actually, the internship that I had at San Diego Naval Hospital was fantastic. There were 17 of us in the intern class there. Our instructor in surgery, for example, was a doctor who had been drafted back into the war, and he was not happy that he'd been drafted back. Very lucrative practice at the University of Michigan, in the surgical department there. And so his philosophy was see one, do one, teach one, in surgery, for example. And so he would have you in as his assistant from the first appendectomy, and then you had another student when you did the second appendectomy. Mostly, I think, fertility. But he didn't want me to do any OB/GYN. At San Diego Naval Hospital, our stint on OB/G delivering babies was 2 weeks, and I delivered 123 babies in 2 weeks. We worked a day and a night and a day and a night.
Were there any particular types of injuries that you would see within the farm community, types of working injuries or anything like that were coming through that would be?
So, crushed fingers, things like that, trauma, a lot of it was trauma. We had the usual illnesses with the little kids and so on, and remember polio was just coming in at that time. That's an extra immunization, and part of it was trying to convince the people to get their kids into the polio shots because it was oral vaccine. And but no, it was just a regular small community family practice. What it was.
You also became connected with Raytheon.
Yeah.
I think you were their doctor too.
When Raytheon first came in, it was, and then General Motors came in here in 1962, I think it was, took over the plant that was there. No, yeah, no.
Breakdown over in the
No,
other
that, no.
Someone's got to go.
That's right. No, then General Motors took over their plant, and it was a sea operation. And Dave Potter was the man there, and he told me, he said, Jack, if you want to be our doc, you've got to be certified in diet medicine, because that was what they did. And so I did go through the scripts course and was certified as a diver. And then began a lot of mixed gas diving things, and we were doing a lot of work for the Navy in anti-submarine warfare.
Let me interrupt the doctor here just for a minute. Just that one concept there, if you can see that this would be something in major oral history where we would stop and go into the training and what you learned from it. It would be interesting to see it from the doctor's perspective, medically, what was going on and how you felt about the training. We won't do that right now because there's another aspect that I'd like you to talk to, and that would be, you also served on the Chamber of Commerce, I guess, from that
Yes, sir.
standpoint. How did they see growth in that?
How
Was
did
it-
we see growth?
Yeah, did they really,
Well, that was one of my things that they did for me right away, was they said, Jack, we want you to be the chair of the hospital committee. And find us a hospital, get us a hospital here. So I went to work trying to find where we could get a hospital in here. Even went so far as to go back to Sacramento and talk with people back there about establishing a hospital district, so we could fund our own hospital out there.
which would be, now, that would be a public hospital, that versus what you had to deal with, which was a
That's right.
private
hospital. Also, by that time, of course, we had more doctors coming into town. I think there were 5 or 6 doctors that had come in from other places. So it wasn't as though I were abandoning my patients that I had before. I was busy with kind of a little closed thing with General Motors mostly. I did a lot of it. Matter of fact, that's when I started to be gone about 5 months out of each year. And the hospital committee was where I was with the Chamber of Commerce. And a group, Tudor Letterhoff Company from San Fernando Valley, was coming in and they were going to build a proprietary, for-profit hospital up on Hope Avenue. And of course, medically, we didn't care for proprietary hospitals, neither did Cottage, who was just then going into their first real expansion thing. So Bert Fields was their realtor for these people. And I went to one of their meetings up there on Hope Avenue in his office. And after the meeting was over, I said, Bert, why don't you people think about coming out Goleta way? This is where the population growth is, and maybe we can do something. And out here. So they did come out here, and they eventually managed George Cavaletto. And George had some land out there that he was willing to lease to them to build their hospital, and they did. And they built this nice little hospital, and we had one of the neurosurgeons from Santa Barbara was going to be chief of staff, and he laughed. I was, of course, working at the hospital too at that time, and he said, Jack, I can't handle this. He said, this is not something I want to do. And so Jack Mosley, the surgeon in town, and Jack Mosley came over, and he said, Jack, I'll try it. And he was about 6 weeks, and he said, I can't do it. So I became the first chief of staff in Silicon Valley Hospital. About that same time, the cottage was giving some of the people with other doctors in town, and family practitioners, a little bit of difficulty with some of their privileges at Cottage Hospital. And so Paul Ashton led this group of people, I think they're about 10, 12, 13 at the meeting, and they decided to build a hospital on the Turnpike Road in Kyriel. And they actually got so far as to buy the property, and they did some digging up there to build their hospital. Even did some footings, I think. And Tudor Letterhoff was not having a good opportunity with their hospital. It was not being used by the community because it was proprietary. And so I suggested to Paul maybe you guys could buy out their hospital. And that's what they did. San Marcos Associates, that was how Renner originally bought out the hospital from Tudor Letterhoff and made it a community hospital. And I still stayed on there as chief of staff for 2 years, first 2 years since then. And it's still there.
How long was that in there? I forgot something.
1965
When
was
they
the
built
first
Goleta?
year. Yeah.
We all used
yeah,
Goleta.
this is one of the things that, when we interviewed Gil, we talked about, he's an architect now, and he's also a city councilor, what makes a community? And one of the things he was talking about is that it had to have all the services, you know, from the standpoint of church, institutions, government institutions, et cetera. We haven't talked about law enforcement here, or any of the other issues that we ran into. But one of the things was hospital, and that was, I think, a very major addition to the Goleta Valley. Then we also didn't go into the idea of burgeoning tract homes as they began. I mean, Albert, we could have him talk about the idea of what it would be like to go in and tear out an orchard where he used to hunt. And Annie used to work in the field across from her, which was the first tract home that went in. But as far as the need for homes, I've interviewed many of the faculty on the campus, particularly Garrett Hardman. He couldn't even move his family from the Bay Area down there because there were no houses. It was almost impossible. you were lucky if you could get a room with somebody. That's everybody. And everybody came as a result. And many of them, I'm sure, your next door neighbor, World War II, right? Marrying Marines, people seeing the area. We'd like to go to the film right now, but before we do, I think we owe our participants a great round of applause because they did a great job.